All right. Hey, 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 everybody. It says we're live. I'm going to check and make sure that that's the case. Looks like it is. All right. Welcome to this midweek live stream. I was out this weekend, but I'm back now. And so I thought I would go live here and just making sure that we're all, yep, looks like we're all good. So let's go ahead and get to it. I'm not going to waste your time with a lot of chitter chatter at the beginning of this thing. I think we are here to hear about cult expertise, what is and isn't a cult expert. And thank you for joining me for this one, because I think this is an important one. I will start off. I'm sorry that I am not wearing my Hawaiian shirt. It is true that I left that in the closet today. I thought I should at least, you know, without wearing a collared shirt today or a suit and tie or something, I thought I should present slightly professionally today and yet still try to be weather appropriate. Excuse me, because it's a little warm here in Denver still. All right, now, why this topic? What are we talking about here? Well, apparently, and I am not on TikTok, and I don't pay a lot of attention to Facebook or Instagram or anything these days. I'm not there either. But I keep hearing about people who are out there claiming to be cult experts. And this got me a little annoyed and a little disturbed, because expertise is not a dime a dozen. It is hard-earned. And in a world, the ex-cult world specifically, we are in a wild, wild west phase of this, where there are no regulatory bodies, there are no licensing boards, there is no ethical enforcement in this field. So, like the cult world, cult gurus and leaders get away with whatever they want. And unfortunately, in the ex-cult space, people get away with whatever they want. They can call themselves whatever title they want. They can proclaim that they are experts. And sometimes that expertise only consists of watching some Netflix documentaries or YouTube videos, or I read a book. And there's a lot more to expertise than that. The social media world of the last couple generations has sort of thrown a lot of fuel on the fire of anti-science and anti-authority thinking, where there's been a kind of dumbing down of knowledge and skill to, well, I saw it in a video, so therefore it must be true. Well, I watched this series, so therefore I know all about it. And unfortunately, as we know from things like the Dunning-Kruger effect, those who have the least amount of knowledge will claim to be and truly believe in their heart of hearts that they know more than people who have studied or worked in a field for years, even decades. And this sort of exacerbates a situation of misinformation, of propaganda, of confusion, and sometimes out of the most honest of intentions. I am not at all saying or thinking that everybody in the ex-cult space are malicious actors who are just in it for themselves or anything like that. But expertise is expertise. And so I thought it might do to create a video today to go over some of this. So, first off, slide over here. Why does this matter? Well, the term, the label cult expert is being used a little loosely these days, and that is a problem. The stakes are high because survivors form up into what I have referred to as trauma communities. There's shared trauma. And when you bring wrong guidance or misinformation into a space like that, you're not just misinforming, you can actually bring about more or trigger more trauma or harm in people who are already the victims of psychological abuse campaigns. Most destructive cults, and I use the term destructive cults because we're not talking about benign groups of extreme believers or fandom where people just have a hobby or an idea that they get around that they think is really, really great and they act a little weird. You know, we can look at like Swifties, for example, or fandom. I'm talking about truly destructive cults. I'm talking about groups like Scientology, groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, groups like the Moonies, and not just religious groups, groups like Nexium, business cults, political cults. These can take on a truly destructive flavor, and they can traumatize the people who are part of these groups. So to come out of that situation is really just step one. Then there's a path of recovery. And when people are looking for answers, or they want to find community, or they want to figure out what happened to them or why it happened to them, they are vulnerable. And that vulnerability can be taken advantage of. It can also simply be misused and create all kinds of trouble. And the other thing, of course, as to why this matters is because with social media, anyone can claim authority. I mean, you read some books, you watched some videos, but we need a bigger picture of this, a better, more rounded idea of what it is that defines expertise. So let's talk about that. Now, first off, lived experience, having been in a cult, is not the same thing as being a cult expert. Personal experience is not something I'm ever going to invalidate or try to make less of, or try to deny or tell somebody that they didn't have that experience, that they don't carry that trauma, that their opinions and ideas about that are not important. They are. They are very important to that person and to their experience. But of course, that experience alone isn't expertise any more than somebody who's survived a fire is now prepared to go off and become a firefighter, or somebody who had a heart attack is now ready to go be an EMT. These are not the same things at all. Living through a cult is not the same thing as understanding how they work. And in fact, a big part of the recovery process of leaving and overcoming the psychological and financial and sometimes physical damage of the cult is that you want to learn and understand how they work. And I have, for almost from day one that I've had my channel and have been speaking with people about this, have been encouraging people to get educated. That is part of gaining expertise. But just because you had the experience of something doesn't mean that you are now an expert in it. And in fact, what we see an awful lot of in the ex-cult communities is that while people are still healing, they will continue to repeat the bad habits that they learned or that they were indoctrinated into. Let's be a little more real about, what they learned, what they were indoctrinated into, without even realizing what they're doing. I can certainly speak from experience on that. And it is a dangerous, dangerous path. And again, this is another one of these places where the Dunning-Kruger effect and many, many, many other logical fallacies and sort of, again, bad habits that the cult indoctrinates people into can be repeated over and over and over again. There's a, as we've talked about so many times, you know, cults create a kind of narcissistic attitudes, very self-centered, very us versus them, very I'm saying it, so therefore it's true. I believe it, therefore it's, you know, truth with a capital T. Even with things that, you know, have nothing to do with the cult, these attitudes, these habits stay with us, even if the belief set doesn't. You can turn off the belief in Xenu, and yet, you know, the dead stare TRs of Scientology's teachings, right? The staring at you while I'm talking to you, or, you know, the feeling that you must acknowledge every single communication that comes your way, or somehow you're deficient, or you must suppress your emotions, or you're not actually controlling yourself, and therefore you don't allow yourself to experience your own emotions. These kind of habits are what I'm talking about, and cult after cult after cult will indoctrinate their members into these kind of bad habits so as to more easily control them. And so a lot of people who come out of cultic situations and bad relationships don't necessarily realize or have the self-awareness for some period of time that they have these bad habits or ideas or logically, you know, fallacious ways of thinking. And so that's, again, where expertise kind of comes into the picture. So can you be an expert without being in a cult? Yeah, of course you can, if they've done the work. Some of the most respected cult experts never belong to a cult. Not everybody in this field is a cult survivor or a former victim of a cult. Margaret Singer was never in a cult. Robert Lifton was never in a cult. Now, some of the most prominent names in the field also have come out of cults. We hear about people like Dr. Steve Hassan or Dr. Janja Lalich or Rick Ross. These are acknowledged names who have been in the field for decades. And then we have people like the man I interviewed recently on this channel, Pat Ryan. He's not prominently out there on social media, but he is most certainly a cult expert and a cult survivor. So the value of people who are cult experts, whether they're cult survivors or not, is the value they bring comes from research, from clinical work that they may have done, and from their ethical practice of the principles that they learn about thought reform, mind control, if you will, and recovery. Because recovery itself can become a monetized 12-step program and its own sort of path of cultism in a way. And fortunately, we don't see too much of that, but it is, like I mentioned earlier, a bit of the wild, wild west. So anything goes. And when it comes to ethical practice, I want to kind of stress and underline and boldface and italicize that, because it really is up to each individual practitioner, especially amongst those of us who are not licensed therapists, to adopt and follow ethical guidelines and practices in how we deal with and help ex-cult members, both on camera and off camera, and especially off camera, because of course, when you're working as an influencer or video content creator or book writer, that's right on the public stage, and people can see the work or see what you're saying, see what you're doing, and pretty quickly establish whether you're following any kind of ethical guidelines or not. But behind the scenes, off camera, when it's private and it's just one-on-one or it's in a small group setting, it might not be so obvious. So that's why that's important. Okay. So what qualifies someone as a cult expert? Well, let's talk about that, because it actually comes from a mix of education, experience, and ethics. So, formal study in psychology, sociology, and trauma recovery would certainly be at the top of the list. You want people who are calling themselves cult experts to actually have some education in this topic. And education here means that they've actually done the work of studying and have that study validated by others. In science, we talk about peer review. In education, we talk about grades. We talk about writing essays. We talk about, doing work and having it evaluated so as to pick up and correct any obvious errors, issues, problems, misunderstandings, confusions, etc. And you want people to sort all that stuff out before they're claiming some title of expertise. Obviously, if somebody is going down a path of becoming a clinician or a therapist or a psychologist, psychiatrist, something like that, then you're going to want to make sure that the person has not only done academic study, but has done internships or residencies and has at accredited places, and has passed those things and is licensed. And that's where we do have some degree of oversight and an examination with licensing boards and things like that. You're also going to want to see in anybody who's calling themselves a cult expert a diverse exposure to multiple high control groups. It's fine, it's absolutely fine for somebody to focus on one group and become or be or hold the status of expert in that group. There's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not at all saying that there would be. I, for example, know a hell of a lot more about Scientology, having lived the experience of it, than I know about, say, the Mormons or, say, about the Jehovah's Witnesses. However, over the years of my research and study, and I'm not doing this video to pimp myself here, by the way. I'm just throwing myself out as the easiest example I can think of to, sort of illustrate these points. Over the years of research and study, I have dived into many, many, many other cults and groups. Their anatomy, their framework, the methods of control, the social network of the groups, the various control mechanisms that the group uses, the ways that people get out of those groups, and the most effective ways of helping somebody from a particular group, because not all groups are the same. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is having as a cult expert, you want somebody who has exposure to lots and lots of different contexts and different situations, so that they'll be able to address the individual needs and concerns of any cult victim or survivor who comes their way. There are over 5,000 destructive cults out there, and that's just a low ball estimate from Steve Hassan. There are so many of these things, and again, religious and non-religious. So you cannot expect anyone to be fully familiar with every single group or cult out there, where it falls into categories and contexts. And this is where, again, you want to have somebody who has the education to understand the frameworks and the differences and similarities between the various groups and the different experiences of the groups. How deep do people go? What are the indoctrination methods? What are the retention methods? Things like that. And so you might have cult experts who have never heard of your particular cult, and that doesn't mean they're not an expert in the area of cults any more than doctors are not doctors if they haven't heard of some new strain of the influenza or something. Things change over time, and you want people who are calling themselves cult experts to be keeping up with those changes, but you can't expect them to be familiar with every single thing out there. Now, also, of course, you're going to want to have people in this field who can think critically, And don't get into or avoid black and white thinking. They can maintain some degree of objectivity, especially again on the area, and we'll talk about this more later, but especially on the area of cults, right? High control groups, authoritarian groups, undue influence, groups that exert undue levels of control or influence over their members. We can put this lots and lots of ways. We don't have to stick with destructive cult, but it's just such a great little pair of words that just describes so much phenomena that I prefer to use those terms. You also need in any field of expertise, when you're dealing with somebody who is truly an expert, they are going to be able to communicate clearly, easily, so that you can understand what they are saying. People who throw around big $10 words every other sentence and try to throw out a lot of academic, confusing language probably have some kind of agenda, and communicating easily and clearly to you isn't part of that agenda. Maybe they're trying to overwhelm, maybe they're trying to impress, maybe they're trying to, show off. But expertise is, at least what I can say about it, ethical expertise is, in whatever field, is very, very interested in sharing that knowledge and those skill sets with people who are not experts. And so you have the sort of, if you've ever been on Reddit, you have the explain it like I'm five, right? Like the let's break down these very complicated or sophisticated or difficult to understand concepts, and let's break it down so that a 5-year-old can understand it. And real expertise is able to do that, because there's a conceptual kind of full understanding of the ideas and frameworks, so that they can use different modes of communication, different ways of communicating about it, to get it across to people. If you find somebody who's bumbling around, you ask them what trauma bonding is, and they give you some off-the-wall answer or something that doesn't make any sense. You ask them about gaslighting, and they say it's lying to people. No, it's not. Things like that. Then you know that maybe you're dealing with somebody who really isn't an expert. Maybe they know a little bit about a few things, or maybe they know a lot about one thing. But expertise tends to be a bit more broad, and that communication factor is something you can watch for. And of course, finally, there is, as I mentioned already, ethical behavior. I'm not going to beat that, like a dead horse here today. But again, I do want to stress and emphasize that ethical behavior is probably more important in the healing recovery fields, whether it's, doctors, physical healing, and nurses and EMTs and first responders. They have a high bar for ethical practice, because when somebody's traumatized, wounded, not up to scratch, not at 100%, they are especially vulnerable. Psychologically speaking, victims of cults have been victimized. To take advantage of them is easier to do, but that much more evil to do at the same time. So especially when working with cult survivors, you really want to see a high standard of ethical behavior. All right. So what kind of red flags exist in self-proclaimed experts? Well, not everyone, let's say, who uses that term cult expert is actually trustworthy. So what do you look out for? Well, first off, sensationalist or alarmist language. One of the things that education and experience teach a person in any field is nuance, degrees, spectrum-based thinking, coming out of that, as I mentioned earlier, black and white thinking. It's all or nothing. Binary all or nothing thinking is what cults specialize in and go out of their way to indoctrinate their members into. The opposite end of that, the recovery end of that, the people who help get people out of that way of thinking are able to think in nuanced ways and are able to communicate in nuanced ways about the topic that they are an expert on. This is why you see pseudoscience always engaging in this hyperbolic, 100% cures kind of thing, while you go to a doctor and the doctor's like, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. Let's do a few more tests and find out. That's very frustrating for some people when they're so used to such certain, solid, binary answers. And again, in the world of social media and social media influencers, there is a tendency to be very sensationalistic or even alarmist. It's what catches our attention. Conflict drives attention. And we are in an attention economy and have been for at least the last 20 years. So people who want to make a lot of money do so on social media often by generating conflict. And conflict and trauma go hand in hand. De-escalating situations, de-escalating language is what recovery and therapy and education are all about. So right away, when you're seeing sensationalistic or alarmist language as a habit, anybody can have moments or times or thumbnails or whatever. But when you're seeing this happening over and over again, this sort of everything is a cult sort of language, right? Everything is not a cult. And by a long shot. But when you get a little bit of knowledge about this stuff, it can be very, very tempting to start applying it across all of life. And sure enough, there's all kinds of control mechanisms and frameworks of control and authoritarian language and measures taken in the military, at businesses, in schools. And people who are not experts will then think, oh, well, look, that's a cult too. And that's a cult, and that's a cult. Nah, that's again, let's bring it back down to some nuance. Another thing that you will see amongst those who really aren't experts or maybe haven't necessarily risen to the ethical standards of expertise is when you see attacks leveled against critics or victims or ex-members who disagree with them. I'm not going to name names or get into any drama here today. You know that that's not what I'm about. And this point is actually the reason why. I don't want to come across that way or create drama with my work or my channel or what I'm trying to do here, because that's just not the right way to deal with trauma communities in the ex-cult world. It might be a great way to get clicks and views, but it's not a great way to heal people. So unfortunately, over the years, I've seen many, many instances of infighting between experts in the ex-cult space. And I have sort of taken the view that this is more the product of undealt with jealousies and bad habits and, people stepping on each other's toes in the space and, sort of competition and that kind of thing. And I've seen some pretty ugly remarks made by various people in the space about other people in the space. But again, when you see And personality conflicts are difficult because people are not always going to agree, nor should they. There are different approaches to this. As I mentioned before, the ex-cult space is a little bit of the wild, wild west. A lot of things have happened over the last 50 years in figuring out how to help people. I did a show recently, again with Pat Ryan, where we discussed deprogramming and how it used to be that people would kidnap folks who were in a cult, throw them in the back of a van, take them to a hotel, and yell and scream at them for days. And I've always said, well, that's silly because you can't use cult methods on somebody who's in a cult to get them out of a cult. That's not how to approach this at all. But I have the benefit of looking back at all the mistakes that people who were maybe well-intentioned but very wrong-headed in their approach, I get to benefit from all the mistakes they made in establishing my own level of knowledge about this stuff. So over all those years, rivalries and competitions and personality clashes and all kinds of things have created conflicts within the ex-cult space. But when you de-escalate that, or if you can sort of objectively step back from it, you can see that the people who demonstrate real expertise and objectivity don't go there. And I think that's a good thing. Another point, of course, is no credentials, no peer feedback or review, no references. People should be able to fall back on, if they are truly an expert in something, educated in something, licensed in a thing, they should certainly be able to back that up with support, with paperwork, with a degree, with whatever it is that they have. They should be able to show those things to you. If it's merely, I said it, therefore it's true, then we are dealing with the same level of expertise that cult gurus and leaders bring. L. Ron Hubbard said it. He knew it was true because he knew everything he said was golden, and therefore, if you don't believe it, you're the jerk, right? That's not at all what real expertise looks like. Now, this one could be slightly controversial because, of course, this is a little subjective, but overpriced, healing services or programs, or, offering services to people and charging for it. Overpriced is the subjective part of that. And I'm the first to say this is going to be extremely context specific. Expertise comes at a price. It often takes months, years of work. Sometimes it takes a lot of money to get trained, to get educated, to travel, to do the work. Doing interventions is not something you generally do in your backyard. It's something you have to go travel to different places. These all cost money. And to expect people in this space to be able to work for free is silly. You don't go down to the hospital and expect that the doctors and the nurses and when your ambulance comes and gets you, that the EMTs are all doing it out of the generosity of their great big hearts. And clearly, people in the healing fields have great big hearts. They work their asses off to help people and go above and beyond almost every day. But they do need to be compensated for that work. It's no different in the ex-cult space. When you do the work of rising up to a position of objective expertise in something, your time becomes valuable and worth something. So the fact that somebody is charging for their time or services is not the red flag. It's overcharging for it. $1,000 an hour would be something I would certainly raise my eyebrows. This kind of thing. But again, context is always, always king with things like this, and value is very much in the eyes of the beholder, so to speak. right? And again, in terms of context, if you're asking somebody to literally pick up their life and travel around the world to go help your family or somebody in your family who's in a cult situation, and they're going to come do that for you, and they're going to spend days educating you, working with them, with the cult victim, and, you know, arranging conversation, arranging intervention. That time should be compensated for well. You know, you're gaining the full benefit of all those years of work on the part of the cult expert, right? So, so even, you know, when I say $1,000 an hour, you know, again, this is a relative contextual thing. All right. Now, finally, of course, there is centering themselves basically instead of lifting up others, right? I put on my little slide there, having a media relations team instead of a cult recovery team. I always have to laugh at that, you know, because, you know, in this day of attention-seeking social media influence, I will sometimes run across people who claim to be experts in something, and you can't even reach them without going through their media rep or something. And I just kind of, wow, where are our priorities at? If I were sick and I went to the hospital and I had to contact the doctor via their media rep, I might wonder about the efficacy of that doctor. My opinion. But certainly the fact that there are people who will make it all about them as the expert and no one else anywhere else knows anything compared to them. Ego is not fun, and not necessary in this work, and very, very counterproductive to the work, in fact, because when you're working with victims of cults, you're the least important part of what's going on in the room. That's my take on it, at least. I think that's an important attitude to have. It's not about how great the expert is. It's about what they can bring to the situation to help and to help the person along. All right. Now, expertise doesn't equal expertise in everything. There is a modern phenomenon, maybe it's been around forever, but it is certainly evident these days, that just because somebody is very, very expert in one area, they are thought of as an expert, or they think of themselves as an expert in everything. And of course, I will name a few names here. I mean, immediately coming to mind are people like Elon Musk. Very, very narrow area of expertise, and yet believes anything they say is truth with a capital T. And this is a trap that social media and news media both tend to feed into. The sort of talking head analyses that CNN popularized and Fox News took off with in the 80s and 90s when cable news networks started, sort of created a situation where people were given free rein to start pontificating on things that they really didn't understand or know much about. They might be an expert on one thing and they're brought on board to talk about that, but then suddenly they're being asked about things that have nothing to do with their expertise. And then those opinions and ideas, Jordan Peterson might be another great example of this. Very, very smart man when it comes to his experience in clinical psychology, but when it comes to politics or religion or gender issues or other things, he's just sharing opinions. And they don't have the same level of weight or expertise as when he's talking about psychology and psychiatry. So these sort of drifts into these other zones and areas that are hot topic items, and people are very, very interested and they want to know what their guy has to say, can fall into the trap of feeding the ego or personality of the expert and giving them the idea that they know more about things than they really do. This is something that really truly plagues us across social media, and I'm very, very familiar with it in the ex-cult space, but it actually is a phenomenon that occurs across every space, because it's a human thing. It's just it, and it's fed by ego, and it's fed by all ends of it. Okay. So it needs to be clear with people that when they are voicing an opinion about a thing, that they be clear about the fact that this is just my opinion. And that's something to watch for and respect when you see it, because that's a differentiation. And that's what we want in experts, is we want them to make very clear lines between this is me speaking from or acting from my actual knowledge and experience in this thing that I know all about, versus, well, I have a limited degree of experience and knowledge with this, so I'm going to give you very limited degrees of opinion about it. And maybe some of my expertise might feed over into that, but we'll get into that in a second, right? But this can become a thing that becomes confusing or misleading to audiences, and so I thought it was worth bringing up. At the same time, cult analysis does bleed over into other fields. And the overlap is real, and so when it's real and when it's there to talk about, then that should be clearly explained as to how. And a real expert will be able to do that, right? Cultic behavior absolutely, positively, without any question at all, shows up in politics, in business, and in activism, as well as in religion. I mean, these are mainline areas of activity for human beings, and people can become extreme in their beliefs and their actions in any sphere of their life, whether they're part of a destructive cult or not. And when groups of people get together, centered around common goals or ideas or ideologies or religious beliefs or business practices, they can start drumming themselves up on cult-like frameworks. Us versus them. I mean, let's look at sports. Sports are not a cult. A sports team is not a cult. But a sports team specializes in us versus them thinking, specializes in ego and we are the best, things like that. And fandom can get quite excited about their sports team versus the other sports team. And so you can get cult-like behavior in that area of life, even though there's not really a cult there. And this is just one example of where these things can bleed one into the other. I will give a specific example here of what I thought was a good example of where cult analysis can be brought over into a political realm, and that is Dr. Steve Hassan's book, The Cult of Trump, which analyzed in detail, chapter by chapter, piece by piece, cult dynamics in an ideological context, right, amongst a specific group of people. And if you read the book, not just react to the title, but if you actually dive into the material, you'll see a case being made point by point, bit by bit, as to how it is that there are cultic dynamics at work in the Republican Party around Donald Trump. And I have commented on that for many, many years. I have made mistakes, absolutely, in overreaching with my own ideas and opinions, and perhaps at times not clearly labeling them as well. I will certainly own that as I sit here today. But that doesn't mean that just because somebody is an expert in one thing, that expertise doesn't have any applicability outside of that field, as long as the expert can explain to you in a logical, rational way how and why. And what does it bring? And this would include things like defining terms and showing patterns of coercive control and separating facts from personal opinions. And they are separatable. And people who are sloppy thinkers or not very good critical thinkers will equate opinion and fact all the time. This is one of the biggest problems we face right now in our society, is we are in a post-truth environment where truth and evidence and facts have been broken down to such a degree in people's minds that there are many people who will question the very existence of truth or facts. You're trying to point out that, you know, there are some ducks on the what was the example I heard the other day? There's some ducks out there on the water. See the ducks out there, and the person goes, "What water? What ducks? There is no pond, right?" You're like, well, there's just no truth, right? And this can be this is the enemy, of course, of not only expertise, but, you know, any degree of objectivity or reality at all, because facts do exist and we do need to understand them if we're going to navigate life successfully. And we have to rely on people who know more than we do to help us navigate a complicated world. There are not simple answers out there to complicated problems. We like to pretend there are, but generally there aren't. You know, and this is where expertise really can shine if it's done right. But we've got a bit of an issue with that in our society, and this, of course, the whole cult world is part of our society. All right, now. Moving on here, what should we be watching for, right? What's your responsibility in all of this? It's on all of us to evaluate who we trust and why, right? So there are questions that you can ask and things you can do to sort of know before you go, right? Before you commit to, is this person an expert? Does this person really know what they're talking about? Can this person help me? And just because somebody's an expert doesn't mean that they're going to be able to help every single person who asks for help, by the way. And a real expert will tell you that. So, does the person explain their reasoning? Can they walk you through the process of how they understand a thing so that you can understand it too? Do they respect survivor voices? Or do they just habitually invalidate them? No, this is how it is. No, this is how. You're going to have to be real careful about things like that. Yes, there are sometimes facts that contradict and make wrong people who are survivors. Sometimes victims and survivors get it wrong on certain things. They learn a little bit about a thing, and just like any other human being, they run with it, and they don't really know what they're talking about when it comes to, say, trauma or coercive control or the mechanisms of control, such as gaslighting, narcissism, etc. These are all, words I'm throwing out right now because they're still hot topic words that are misused by the majority of people out there on social media and in the news media who are using them. Whereas real experts will know immediately, oh yeah, that's not exactly what that concept actually is. But how do you deal with that? Do you just tell everybody how wrong they are, or do you respectfully educate and inform the person you're dealing with? Okay, well, actually gaslighting is a little bit more than lying to a person. Let me walk you through it. right? It's a repeating pattern of behavior, for example. Gaslighting doesn't just happen once. And ... You know, you can respectfully work with people to help them understand a thing, or you can try to beat it into them. And real expertise clearly isn't about domination and control. Also, and this is a real important one, are they open to correction? Or do they just demand, I said it, therefore it's true? The thing that high education should bring to people, and I'll say this as a blanket statement because I've talked with enough highly educated people that and been through enough education myself, that I believe that this is a true thing. When you become highly educated in a thing, what you actually come to realize is how little you know about it. And you may know a lot more than most other people. 99% of the people out there do not know as much about cults as Rick Ross, Steve Hassan, Janja Lalich, me, Pat Ryan, blah, 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 right? We've made it our life work to understand this. But among experts, when you hear us talk to each other, right, real expertise acknowledges what it does not know or understand just as easily as it will bring to the table what it does know or understand. And when you find ego taking over that, that's a red flag. When it's, no, I know how it is, and this is how it is, right? And they're dead wrong, you know, ooh, that's awkward and not a good look. So some humility, let's say, is certainly appropriate among experts, and among real experts, you will find that. I'll bring another example in just as a point, is something I've heard many times over the years. I've not never, but I've rarely been in the world of acting behind the scenes, you know, behind the cameras and all that, working with actors. But I've heard over and over and over again amongst the acting community that the people who are truly at the top of their game, who are really good at their job, are the nicest people you would ever want to deal with. On set, you know, maybe off, I don't know, but professionally speaking, they're chill. They're not all about attitude and ego and I'm got 5 Oscars, you know, and BAFTAs and you know, whatever else that they're bringing, right? They're not about that. When you're at the top of your craft, you're about the craft and the art of it, the skill of it, the joy of it. And even in the ex-cult world, there is a joy to be experienced in helping other people. I'm telling you, it's a rush like nothing else. It's truly a gift to be able to be in a position to help another human being, whether medically or through you know, trauma healing, or through skill set sharing, or through protection, or through entertainment. However you're bringing value to somebody else's life, it's awesome when you're doing it. And it just feels so right and so wonderful that it brings a kind of joy. And that's, there's no ego there. It's just applying the skill, applying the craft, you know, to get done what you want to get done with that person. And so fakes and people who don't really know what they're doing are bumbling their way through that because they can't achieve that level of bringing value to someone else. So they're sort of faking it. And we all fake it till we make it in one degree or another. That's what it is to be human. But I think you understand what I'm talking about when I say that there's a kind of a line in the sand where somebody's all about the titles and the authority and the the reputation and gaining the admiration from others for having those titles rather than actually applying themselves to earn the title. I think we all understand that idea. And of course, again, as we mentioned earlier, can they separate opinion from structured analysis? Can they go, okay, this is something I don't know a whole lot about, and I'm just going to tell you straight up, I'm going to tell you my opinion. Maybe it's an informed or a learned opinion, but it's different from, say, how I'm going to break down coercive control for you, right? If I'm offering opinions about movies, those are opinions. I'm not a movie maker, and I wouldn't pretend to be. I know a little bit about the process and the craft of movie making compared to, say, a real expert like a Steven Spielberg. I couldn't hold a candle to that man when it comes to voicing how to do the work of making a movie. And if I were to sit here and pontificate to you about, or try to tell you all the ways that Steven Spielberg screwed up this movie, those would simply be my opinions. Now, if I'm going to talk to you about coercive control, I know more about that than I'm pretty sure than Steven Spielberg does. And, and we could have a back and forth on that. So, this is also, again, part of expertise is saying that, voicing that, putting that out there. Okay. So, some final thoughts here for today. We do need higher standards for talking about cults, right? We really do. Because right now, in the world of the wild, wild west, everybody's an expert. And they're not. Not all survivors are experts, and not all experts are survivors. Real cult education requires humility and discipline and care. It's a nice way of summing up a lot of what I've said today. So we have a space created now. 20 years ago, this space barely existed in public attention and discussion. Now it's kitchen table talk, as my friend Vlad likes to say, right? It's common discourse. It's people talk about it around the kitchen table, right? Dining room table. They'll talk about cults. They'll talk about the latest documentaries they saw on Netflix or Hulu or Apple Plus or something, and they bring what they believe they know, to the conversation, and it's a thing. It is a legit, and it seems to me permanent, addition to the true crime genre of podcasting and documentary work and entertainment work, that cults are there. And people know that cults exist. People are aware of the fact that cult leaders are bad people who take advantage of others. They might not necessarily understand exactly how. They might have mystical kind of understandings about how cult leaders work. They hypnotized him with his eyes. He just looked at the person, and, these kinds of things. They might have, sort of, shall we say, sophomoric ideas about how all this stuff works, but they have an idea, and that's better than it was 30, 40 years ago. It truly is. To have some idea of that is better than having no idea of it. But to pretend that everybody's an expert, or just because you read some things or talked to some people or had the experience of being in a cult, doesn't bring expertise. So I believe that now that the space is created and is a real thing, and I really don't think it's going anywhere, we need to protect this space by lifting up responsible voices and recognizing irresponsible voices for what they are, and asking the right questions in the right way so that we can navigate the space, y'all can navigate the space without getting further traumatized, further hurt by people who are only pretenders. We don't want that. Nobody, I don't think anybody, certainly not anybody at the level of those of us who have dedicated our lives to this, who this is our livelihood, this is what we do. I don't want you guys hurt, you know, or further traumatized by bad actors in the space. And I will also say, just as a general statement, I've seen this across social media and news media spaces, that not everybody who's a cult survivor or was victimized by a cult is necessarily an inherently good person. If you want to divide people up into good and bad, which is a way you could think about people, there are people who come out of cults, and whether it was because they were so victimized by the cult or whether they were broken before they got into the cult, they come out and they play the part of a cult victim because they are a cult victim, and yet they continue to be bad actors, take advantage of other people, lie about their experiences, lie about their credentials, act performative in their discussion or narratives of their cult experience rather than, you know, honestly discussing it, truly doing the work of overcoming or recovering from that work. Instead, there are some people who will massage the experience for personal reasons and are motivated to hold on to their trauma or hold on to the experience of it rather than be able to let it go and go into the past for themselves so that they can move forward in life. They will remain stuck in that narrative. And that's very unfortunate, because it's unfortunate for them, and it's unfortunate for those who get sucked into the vortex of such personalities, because it's sort of this infinitely spinning loop that never changes and doesn't grow or progress past that. And again, real expertise in this field is about healing and growing and progressing. And I think that that is another phenomenon, for lack of a better word, right? For some of what goes on in these spaces across the boards. I've seen it in ex-cult social media spaces, across the boards, not just in the Scientology space, and in the news media. I have seen that. There are media personalities who are like that. And so they can create an awful lot of attention and drama around themselves for the sake of getting more attention and drama. And that's just part of life. It's not something that's ever going to go away. It's not something that we're going to be able to educate people out of, because it's not rooted in education. It's not about what you know. It's about trauma, and it's about emotions. So that's what I thought I would throw out there today. So since we're here, and since we're live, and since I've got a comment box right in front of me here, I thought, and also since we did not do a Q&A show this week, I would open the floor to any questions from you all who are in the audience watching right now, if you have any, about this, or any, if you wanted to throw anything in the comment section there about any experiences you've had with self-proclaimed experts. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. So we'll give this a minute or two and see if anything comes my way. And of course, let me, let's just try that and see if you have anything for me. I'm just going to take a quick look here since I've only barely been looking at the comments while we've been going along here. Not too many to go through, which is fine. Hopefully this video will get more views. On replay. But I thought I would do this live for this part of it. Yeah, I was quite, Vicky is saying here that I did not really think I would see a Survivor's channel and group become a cult of personality, but I watched it. I did not expect the toxic drama and melodrama in the ex-Scientology space online. It's so sad to see. I agree. I will tell you, I'll share with you guys that personally, I think it was about a year or two after I got out of Scientology that I started becoming aware of the infighting amongst the cult experts, right? And these kind of rivalries that have existed. And I realized that I had stepped into a world that had been going on for a lot longer than I was in it. Excuse me. And that some of these personality clashes, which I mentioned in the video here, were quite strong, you know, and to see then over time how sort of factions or teams would develop, and it became very soap opera-ish, you know, not just among, I'm not just referring to the cult experts, because factually they actually keep it toned down with each other a lot more than you might imagine, compared to how victims of cults can go after each other. It can be vicious, absolutely vicious. And the other thing that makes it so difficult in the ex-cult spaces is the fact that you have groups like Scientology or the Jehovah's Witnesses who have members, active members, whether the Office of Special Affairs or whether, you know, volunteer workers in Bethel, or, you know, amongst the Mormon community, you have people working in the church structure who monitor social media and exacerbate the drama and go in and encourage it. This was really disheartening to learn about and watch happen, because it's hard sometimes to differentiate between cult victims who are having a hard time and getting into conflicts with one another, and OSA, the Office of Special Affairs, right, and Scientology, riling up those conflicts. And you know, I know that I and others in the past have sometimes labeled things as OSA that may or may not have been OSA, but it's always credibly OSA. And that's what's so crazy making about some of these ex-cult spaces in particular versus some of the other areas of activity in the world where people don't have a vested interest in riling up conflict. It's just, you know, personality clashes and people having at each other. You know, there's nobody at Lucasfilm monitoring social media about Star Wars and Star Trek and riling people up against Star Trek and for Star Wars. I very, very much doubt that there's anybody being paid to do that work. But there are people in the Office of Special Affairs who go to work every day, and part of their job is going onto social media and riling people in the ex-Scientology space up against each other. That is a fact, and that's a very unfortunate one. Okay, let's see what we have here. Some questions coming in. Have you seen the film Midsommar? Tim Greenglass asks me. I have not watched the entire film beginning to end. I started watching it, and I sort of, for the sake of wanting to see what the deal was with the movie, I kind of fast forwarded through some of it. But I have not watched the film in its entirety, and it's on my list of films to watch. Let me put it that way. So, Nick XO asks, how does the staff pay system work in Scientology? How much would an exec make per week compared to, say, a letter reg? Okay, very, very quickly, because I don't want to go too far off topic here today in these questions. The staff pay system is a points system, so an arbitrary number of points is assigned to jobs at the different levels of the organizing board of Scientology. So the ED might get 5 points, where an auditor gets 3 points and a letter reg gets 1 point. And then the staff pay sum, let's say it's $500, comes in to pay everybody. And it's all the points of all the people on all the jobs are added up. And then that determines, let's say there's 50 points altogether for all the staff who are on the job in an org. And there's $500. So 50 into 500, what is that, $10 a point or unit? It's a unit system, I should say, rather than a point system. Same thing. And that's how their pay is allocated to them. And then there are bonuses given for training, I think maybe auditing level, but certainly training level. The more trained you are as an executive or as an auditor or whatever, the more money you'll make. More points or units are assigned to you. That's basically in a nutshell how it works. All right, let's see here. Any other questions? Yeah, exactly, Love Food Kitchen, and that is the issue. It's and it's a difficult one, right? Love Food Kitchen says here the issue with OSA is that it just becomes a catch-all for all excuses. Anyone pointing out bad behavior suddenly becomes, you must be OSA just to silence others. And you're absolutely right. I've seen that done. I mean, hell, I might have done that myself at some point. And it's the difficulty of differentiating those sources on a social media platform where everybody's kind of anonymous. Everybody's got little avatars and who knows who you're talking to. That makes that so difficult. In many ways, I wish that that social media demanded, accountability in terms of identity, but I also understand that that there are things that would not be possible on social media if we did not have the power of anonymity. So I get it's a double-sided coin on that one, and that's a rough one. Oh yeah, Love Food Kitchen asks, how did my weekend go? The company involved doesn't have the best reputation, so it'll be interesting to see the final result. Oh, that's interesting about the pay. I will quickly say again, not to go too far off beam, but I was involved in a Jubilee production this weekend called Middle Ground. That was the format of the show. And if you have been to, or haven't been rather, to the Jubilee production or YouTube channel, I would encourage you to do so, because there are some of their videos that have gone the most viral have been conflict-driven videos, as we've discussed today, right? Conflict drives attention, and which drives, whether videos go viral or not. But those are not the only format of video that Jubilee produces, and they do a series of shows called Middle Ground, and that was what I was part of. And very, very quickly, I will tell you that there were 4 of us ex-Scientologists, and there were 4 ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And there wasn't a lot of conflict. In fact, there wasn't really any conflict. We agreed and discussed a lot of similarities, compared and contrasted the experiences and the organizations and the frameworks of control. We were given pretty decent prompts or questions to respond to. And that's the format of the Middle Ground show, is it's literally designed to try to get people talking and finding middle ground, common ground. And that's why I agreed to be part of it in the first place. So I was able to bring some of my experience and knowledge to it. The only frustrating thing about filming the show was that we didn't have enough time to really give as complete answers or as many of the answers as we all wanted to bring to it. And one thing I'll share that was kind of funny, I didn't sign anything that says I couldn't share any of this, so I'll share this with you, is that we were told that that they were trying really hard to have set up an ex-Scientologist versus Scientologist middle ground show, or a Jehovah's Witnesses versus ex-Jehovah's Witnesses middle ground show. But of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Scientologists are never going to agree to do such a thing and provide members to go talk to us ex-members, right? And they have various colorful phrases and words to describe us ex-members, like apostates and, you know, things like that. And the entire model, the entire structure of a cult, destructive cult, demands that ex-members be vilified, made into enemies, turned into the worst versions of themselves, so that the members can continue to be members and not pay any attention to or listen to what the ex-members have to say. So the very nature of a destructive cult prevents it from ever being part of a show like Middle Ground. They'll never do it. And if they do, I mean, I'll eat my words and I'll be happy to do so, because I'd love to be part of a show where I would get to go talk with Scientologists. It would be awesome. And it would also be a wonderful opportunity to info dump on them some facts and statistics and things they don't know from inside the bubble world. Be an interesting format, wouldn't it, right? But of course, you know, the nature of the cults will really never allow them to be part of something like that. So that's kind of what that was about. Somebody's asking me here, do you think, Vicky says, question, do you think these protests at Scientology facilities, especially accosting Scientology staffers, are effective or right? No, they are neither. They are attention-seeking behavior that is draws attention from outside the cult to the cult. And that is a valid form of protest. No question about it. It absolutely is valid. But it is not effective in terms of changing the hearts and minds of the people who are inside the group. And in fact, because of the way it's done, it forces the membership to double down on their beliefs. So the protesting that is done in a hostile, antagonistic way to the membership and is goading them and pushing them and taunting them and teasing them is a way to make sure less people leave the group, because you're giving the group an enemy to focus on, the protesters. And the protesters prove through those actions everything that the cult is telling its membership about why they need to stay inside and be members, because look at how unsafe it is for you out there. Look at how crazy those people are. Look at how irrational they behave. Look at how they hate us. Look at how they treat us. Inside the group, we promote, Scientology, right? Inside the group, we promote human rights. We promote communication. Look at the creed. We can think freely, talk freely, write freely, our own opinions, encounter or utter or write upon the opinions of others. This is what Scientologists tell themselves. It's not true that they have that ability, but they tell themselves they do. And when protesters treat them as disrespectfully and inhumanely as some protesters do, and I absolutely am not going to name names, then you get that result. And it is what it is. And there are some protesters in Los Angeles, specifically, I remember, who flat out said, I don't care about getting people out of the cult. I'm trying to raise awareness about how bad the cult is. Valid. Valid. That is what some versions of protesting look like. From my position, it makes my job harder, though. So I don't appreciate it. And it's not a form of protest that I want to encourage because it makes my job harder in trying to get people out. And that's where I live, right? So that's why I clash with it. But I have to acknowledge that bringing exposure to the abuses of Scientology or any cult is something I want to see happen. I believe there's a middle ground where protesting can be done without being that way and still bring attention to the abuses. And I think what we saw a lot of in 2007, 2008, I can't remember, I can never remember which year, with Anonymous, the way the Anonymous hacktivists sort of, brought attention to Scientology and sustained it for like a year. I think that was a very, very effective way of protesting it. And those protests were a lot more in the spirit of how Alexander Barnes Ross does protesting. That's a great way. I 100% support his way of going about protesting because he's not making my job harder with the way he's doing protests, because it's much more about how we care about the people who are inside, and we want to simply let them know that we're disagreeing with the abuses that go on in the organization, even if they as individual members don't feel that they are being abused. We want to at least let them know that there is abuse going on in this organization, and we think they should know about it. And that's a very different attitude, really, is the difference, is the attitude with which you bring to the protest, that I think makes all the difference in what I think of as effective protesting. So that's probably the best way I've ever described my issues with that. I've been a bit emotional in the past sometimes with that, because I get a little upset sometimes at people making my job harder. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Xion asks, have you noticed the Anonymous has been speaking out about the current political scene recently? Yes, I have. Yes, I've noticed that. Okay, good. Do they not realize, I found Dory says, do they not realize they are protesting what they are trying to protect human rights? They're trying to protect human rights. No, I don't think they realize that. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I think I got the idea of what you were saying there. Okay, so I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to go too far off the beam here. This was about cult expertise, and I've tried to align my answers with that today. So fair enough, Low Food Kitchen. I hear you on that one. Anonymous is not the same Anonymous as it was in 2007 and 8. That is very, very true. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap it up for today. I want to encourage anybody watching this to, of course, subscribe to my channel and check out other videos that I have here related to cult recovery and cult anatomy and cult recovery or cult recruitment. I got it all covered here. We got stuff on everything about cults on this channel, and I hope that you will check out the thousands of videos that I've posted here about all of this. It has been a fun path for me, ups and downs, no question about it, but mostly a path of progress and fun, sort of documenting my learning process from first coming out of Scientology all the way to where I'm at now, where I feel I'm recovered from Scientology, and I now help other people not only recover from Scientology, but other groups as well. I'm wide open to help you if you are watching this and you are someone who feels you could use some help. I am not a licensed therapist, and I am never pretending to be one. I've never said that I am, because I'm not, but I do consultation, and I do charge for my time, but I believe I charge a reasonable amount. And any consultation that occurs with me is completely confidential on both ends. What happens in our talks stays in our talks. So anyway, if that's something that you could use some help with, I'm here for you. And of course, if you have family or friends who are trapped in a cult or stuck in a situation and of some kind of coercion, some kind of control, you don't know how to talk to them, what to do. I've put a lot of stuff here on this channel about how to talk to cult members and how to get through to their, get inside their thought fortress. I love that analogy. I just keep returning to it. There's a lot of stuff here on that, and I would encourage you to check out the work on this channel, but you can always contact me directly. I know there's a lot of stuff to sift through, and it's a little hard to organize a YouTube channel so that it's easy to find everything when you've got so much content. So if you want to reach out to me, of course, you always can. My email address that you can reach out to me at is in the description section of every video I've ever made. It's askchrisshelton@gmail.com, and we can go from there. All right. I'll go ahead and wrap up now. Thank you very much for your viewership and your support. And of course, you can always support the channel through Patreon, PayPal, etc. Links below. All right, guys. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.